And one of the things we hinted at a couple episodes ago was this physical AI and robots. In the article or the report, we call it Robotnik. Um, and when I think of robots and I think of artificial intelligence and I think of technology, the last thing I associate that with is farming or agriculture. But one of the leading industries for the application of robots is farming, and that's pretty incredible.
In a world defined by relentless innovation and geopolitical shifts, understanding what's truly next is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. This is RTX, the future. Your guides through tomorrow's complex landscape are two individuals with unparalleled insight. Jay Mazzelli, co-founder and CEO of Red Thread X, a retired Army colonel and a veteran leader in defense and technology innovation, brings decades of experience from the front lines of strategic development. Nate Platts, an active duty lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, actively shaping future capabilities through advanced data and strategic sustainment. Together, Jay and Nate offer a rare vantage point, having advised at the highest levels, navigated complex technological revolutions, and influenced the strategic implications of innovation long before they hit the mainstream. On RTX, the future, they cut through the noise to deliver the unvarnished truth about what's coming, why it matters, and what you can do about it. Stop guessing. Start knowing.
What's going on, Jay?
Hey Nate, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, doing well.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into this.
I am too. It's going to be a really interesting discussion as we look at some of the emerging technologies that are going to be absolutely necessary. And I'd like to tie this back to some of our previous discussion from season one. We talked about the work with lifespan and health span and how humans are going to potentially live much longer and be much more active. And we hinted at the agricultural demands for food supply as the population grows and as the population lives longer. And now we've got an opportunity to really deep dive on this.
Yeah, and we talked that, and one of the things we hinted at a couple episodes ago was this physical AI and robots. In the article or the report, we call it Robotnik. Um, and when I think of robots and I think of artificial intelligence and I think of technology, the last thing I associate that with is farming or agriculture. But one of the leading industries for the application of robots is farming, and that's pretty incredible.
It is, and there's been some really remarkable strides in this regard. One of them being a pivot away from humanoid looking or bipedal robots to robots that are truly functional and that can really do their requirements out there in the wild.
Yeah, one of them we saw was Laser Weeder, right? And this is a company, or this is the company from Carbon Robotics is the company. The product is called Laser Weeder. It uses computer vision to differentiate between weeds and crops. It destroys weeds with a laser at a rate of 5,000 per minute. And so this does a lot of great things. One, it reduces the requirement for a human to go out there and do some de-weeding. It reduces the requirement to have herbicides, which does a couple things. It reduces the toxic chemicals that are in your crops, which are important to me. That tries to eat healthy and make sure my family is getting the best food available to them. But also, it reduces the cost to farmers by 66% in those herbicide costs. So there's increased savings, which is back, to the increased profit margins to the farmers. That's pretty awesome.
It is, and there's incredible waste when it comes to those spray herbicides too. I want to say it's almost 90% of the herbicide just goes to waste to get that targeted effect on those handful of weeds that this laser on the laser weeder is able to affect.
One, you think about what it's doing to the water tables. You think about the potential health. You think about the potential health impacts. This is a pretty awesome technology, and you know if you can go online, maybe we'll drop a video in the video feed for our podcast. But it's pretty cool to watch it work. It's a giant, it looks like a combine. For those of you that don't know what a combine is, it just walks along the rows of crops there and just zaps all these weeds. And it uses a combination of AI agentic algorithms and computer vision to identify the weeds and to laser them out of existence. And that increases yield and reduces cost, increases savings for the farmers, and it's a better product for the consumer.
And as we had previously discussed, it becomes part of this data-driven ecosystem for agriculture going forward.
Yeah, and this is one thing, we hinted at this a couple podcasts ago, but we came across this farmer that highlighted if you don't have data, you can't monetize the outcomes that you receive in the fields. And that's the last thing I would expect from a farmer. But data is everywhere, to include in how you grow your food and to how farmers, not just commercial farmers, but individual private farmers are trying to monetize and create the best product, but also get the best yield from their crop.
One of the things that caught my attention as we were doing this analysis is not only the data that's going to be generated by the robots themselves. For example, the laser weeder and the 5,000 weeds per minute is able to zap with its onboard lasers and its computer vision and everything it's harvesting, but the role that NASA has taken on in informing the agriculture industry.
Yes.
So, what did you discover with that?
So NASA has a public-private consortium called NASA Acres, right? For some reason, I think of a movie or a TV show called Green Acres when I was a kid, which is way predating my time, but was on Nick at Night. But NASA Acres, it uses satellite data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and it helps American farmers, American farmers primarily right now, make better decisions on the water use, crop selection, and pest detection for their areas, for the land. And when I was thinking through this, I was like, why would NASA be involved in this? And it hit me. The realization is not because they're trying to help out farmers, but if we're looking at space exploration, which we've hit upon a couple times in our podcast series, and we're looking at potentially exploring Mars or the moon and doing terraforming, it helps us to be able to identify where those places are that are have the best bang for your buck. And so why not develop and test that technology on Earth and help out American farmers get the best yield for their crop. But that's an aside. They are providing this technology today, and farmers are using that data to make better decisions about how they plant and where they plant and when they plant.
Right, which really creates this entire data-driven ecosystem for agriculture where individual drones are doing things like monitoring plant health, detecting pests, companies like Solix and what they're doing, down to the individual plant level. We've got things like the laser weeder that's able to manage fields, but it's also going to generate data. And then all that couples together with what is happening up to and including space with NASA. And I think this is really pretty critical as we look at John Deere's stated objective to be able to deploy 100% autonomous farming by 2030. So that's going to be critical as the number of acres available for agriculture continues to diminish versus the number of people you have to feed from that acreage.
Yeah. And, an important stat with that associated with your comment there is, the population growth, by 2060 for the Earth is expected to be over 10 billion with a B, right? And so the impact for that is the world needs to produce over 50% more food. And how do you do that? Like, we're not exactly making more land. And so you have to become more efficient with the land that you have. You have to be more strategic. You have to have the data to make better decisions. You have to find healthier ways to produce a lot of food. And if you can do it more rapidly, if you can do it autonomously, it reduces the costs, and that allows you to scale and allows you to grow. When we mention John Deere trying to reach autonomous farming by 2030, the first image that comes to my mind is from the movie Interstellar, which is one of my favorite movies because it's heavy on the nerd, heavy on the science and the math. But Matthew McConaughey is it stars in that. But they feature in a small way autonomous farming with their combines that are controlled autonomously. And I just think through that with John Deere. You go through, I'm driving home back to Iowa and I walk through the cornfields and I'm seeing all these combines just working by themselves. That's pretty incredible that science fiction is becoming science fact.
And associated with that, the increase in the human population to 10 billion, that is challenging in and of itself with that 50% increase in food productivity we're going to need. And that's not even looking at necessarily how we're going to either raise or harvest protein.
How we make our food sources sustainable, right? There's research into overfishing, over harvesting, what you get when you plant too often in the same plot of soil, how you can, get diminishing returns for your crops. And so, you now have farm-based fish, you have farm-based, seaweed, you have farm-based seafood, you have different innovations that are all over this place in terms of the agriculture, and it's the term is called agriculture 4.0. How do you get the most? How do you innovate in this place that has hasn't changed in practice drastically in the entirety of human culture, especially recently. But now we're applying this data to get the most out of what we are applying. And so I don't have a good answer for you other than that, you know, there's a lot of innovation and a lot of growth and a lot of use of robots, a lot of use of data to try to get the most to meet the demands for where we're going to be in the future.
Right. Yeah. So over 2% loss of arable land just in the United States alone as global population continues to increase. And unequivocally, we have to get more efficient, hence the activities and the efforts you described.
Yes, Jay, agricultural land is diminishing in the United States. Between 2017 and 2022 alone, farms decreased by 20.1 million acres. That's 2.2%. And so, as we look at why is there a push for all this innovation, for all this tech, not only is it required for meeting the future demand of the growing population, not only is it required to increase profit share and increase the product that we are pushing out, but because we have to become more efficient with the land that we're using. And the only way to do that is to employ technology that allows us to operate autonomously or to make better decisions because of the data that's available. The thing that I keep drawing a line to is, this tech is not one sided. And so as we look at increasing the technology for farming, for anything that we've talked about, I always think as we also explore this space race and, the goal to occupy Mars or the moon or go beyond, this tech applies to how we would potentially employ this in, a foreign planet. So if we're going to actually occupy Mars, the most efficient way to do that is to use NASA acres to find the best plot of land that has the best water source potentially, or that is the most advantageous to terraforming, and to employ autonomous systems to create a habitable environment for uh, humans. And you could look at this as, yes, we're trying to make the most of the earth and what we have available to us, but we're also creating technologies that we can employ to expand our reach beyond just the earth.
Right. Yes, we're certainly not going to rely on a supply chain that goes from the Earth to the Moon to Mars to try and ship food.
It'd be incredibly expensive, as we talked about, right? Like it's about how you can use resources where you are, not just launch things into space because you know everything has a cost.
Right. So, doubling back to a comment from the beginning of this particular podcast, what I find really interesting about this discovery is twofold. One, current global population is estimated to be a little bit over 8 billion. So we're going to see a 2 billion person growth over the next 20 to 30 years in the human population on Earth. At the same time, we're seeing some level of reduction in available land for agriculture. And a major part of the mitigation for that is a combination of data, the utilization of data via AI driven technologies that are manifested in robots that are highly functional and achieving these greater than just marginal return in terms of the investment, the 5,000 weeds, the reduction in herbicide cost and utilization. And so it's very interesting to me to look at this clear demonstration of the value of functional robots that can work in the real world, in a field, in various states in the United States or various countries around the world, versus the human fascination with bipedal or humanoid robotic design.
Yeah, that's a great transition. If I were to throw out there, hey, there's a robot, the first thing that comes to mind is a couple things. One, if you're a kid, or if you're a kid at heart, it might be R2D2 or C3PO, right, from Star Wars. You got to give that shout out. But most people are going to come to a bipedal humanoid robot that looks or resembles a human in form factor, right? Whether it's Terminator, whether that's iRobot, it's everywhere in pulp culture. It's everywhere in our fascination with what a robot is, whether it's Data from Star Trek or you name it. But what we found is like the human body is a really difficult thing to replicate. It's not just standing and moving, but the number of muscles in your hand is it's vast, and these are really fine movements, right? To pick a pen up, to either grab a dumbbell and then from going from grabbing a dumbbell that weighs 30 pounds to tying your shoe, like that is a small thing that we don't think about. But to a robot that is acting on trained algorithms or rote mechanics, that is not a simple task. And if you look at where most functionality for robots is going to come from, it's not going to be of a humanoid form. It's going to be for a specific purpose that has a specific task that might look like a giant combine that does lasers at 5,000 a minute to reduce weeds, right? And I think that we are starting to realize that, and we're moving past that. And I think that's going to be fun to see. What have you seen, Jay?
So similarly, I think we're clearly demonstrating the value proposition, and not just robots inside of a factory that go around and assemble, a part on a car or weld something or pick boxes in an Amazon distribution center. But no kidding, these robots that are functional out and able to just take in all the variables of the environment of a farmer's field or something like that. I think the other interesting development to me was starting to create these hybrid biologic controlled robots where what we would consider to be very primitive organisms, like basically a mushroom or some type of fungus, you can start to enable these things with technology and have some level of organic embed or control over these non-humanoid designs.
Yeah, we saw a robot that was driven by a living fungi, right? So, mushroom. It utilized the mushroom's electrical signals for the movement and environmental sensing, right? So, you basically grow a robot on this, plant a mushroom on this robot, and it's able to move about its environment by its, electrical sensing, which is crazy. It reminds me of this this mushroom that occupies ants, and it's a fungus that controls it until it dies, and then it sprouts off and replicates, which is kind of scary and freaky. And I believe it was a basis of an X-Files episode. But this is pretty cool, right? It's that bio mechanics that we've explored, whether it's through Nitri and their biocomputing or what they're doing with neurons at a different scale. And I think that's pretty incredible.
Right. And similarly, one of the discoveries I found really fascinating was biomimicry, where things like replicating the structure of a California blackworm with a robot with air chambers that can manipulate its orientation, its ability to twist, its ability to expand and contract and to twist, how that understanding of that particular organic design was potentially a more optimal design for a robot than saying, hey, we want this thing to look and act like a human.
Yeah, bipedalism is hard, right? That's the one thing we came back to. We were looking at this, and I think one scientist we were reading about said, we're struggling from a crisis of imagination by always coming back to a human-like design versus, what's the functional design? If I need to move something, right? The thing that looks cool is, can I have a Tesla robot pick up a box and move it over to from this spot A to spot B? But is that the most efficient way to do that? Is that the best design for a robot? Or could I have something that looks like a California blackbird? It looks weird as hell, right? I mean, it just looks goofy. But it's able to effectively, efficiently transport large objects uh, with a small mass and do it over, a varied environment in terms of terrain. Like it's one of those things we might see some different aspects if we just have a little bit more creativity.
Not to just belabor a point, but that robotic worm might actually be better at grabbing a pencil and writing than a humanoid effort to attempt a hand.
Absolutely.
It may be able to wrap around this thing, and and there's just so many different ways this could go. And what I love is that through this analysis, we're really able to explore the notion of intentional and functional design for robots is going to open a world of possibilities for us.
Yeah, I really do think that the world of possibilities is something that I'm excited for. But it's always good at looking at the other side of the coin, right? I go back to the regulation and the governance or the lack thereof when it comes to technology and AI. We've talked about the try first culture of large language models and agents and AI and all these giant tech corporations. One of the things we reference in our report is the 1935 Russian film Loss of Sensation, right? And I don't know where we found this, but it's awesome. And the premise of this video, of this movie, you can look it up, Loss of Sensation, 1935. it's a universal robot, right? So in 1935, people were talking about robots, and this robot looks like a bipedal human. It's intended to help workers, right? It was repurposed by the military as a weapon against them. And it kind of serves as a reminder, is like, while the function of robots has this immense promise, right? We have to be very cognizant about where we put the human in the loop and where we don't, because artificial intelligence requires three things. It requires compute, it requires a question to be asked, and it requires the data. But the most important thing is it's going to answer the question that you ask it. And if you aren't careful with what you ask it, you're not going to be able to control it once you let it go into the world. There's um, an analogy that people tell in the AI world of like a machine that's designed to make paper clips, and it's an AI tool that is saying, hey, you will make paper clips in the most efficient way. And because it's not controlled and because it's not given clear guidance, it makes everything in the world paperclip, because that's what it was designed to do. And it's efficient as hell as at it. And so this 1935 story, this movie Lost in Sensation, has kind of the same note, right? It's a tool that was designed to help people, but it was repurposed for something that was not helpful and became dangerous. And I think that as we employ this tech and as we see it come around us, we have to ask, what are the control mechanisms? Where is the human in the loop? When should a human not be in the loop? And we need to be very deliberate about when and why we decide to make things truly, purely autonomous.
Great point, Nate. And it's going to be happening fast. And we've seen that just over this 1 year of working together as we're driving towards this continuous reporting and analysis and looking at all of the different activities that are happening across the breadth of technology.
Yeah, it's been fun. I mean, even like sometimes we'll have a podcast and be like, hey, we're going to talk about this topic next week, and it's like, holy shit, a lot happened in that next week, and we're going to change topics completely because things we said have changed dramatically. And so this has been, personally very fun. So I get to work with you, but also I'm learning a hell of a lot.
Yeah, I know I am too. And I love the fact that we can share these lessons via our reports, via our engagements, and also via the podcast here.
Yeah. So where do you think this is going in the next 5 or 10 years? Like, do you have a sense of, like, what's the biggest thing you think from agriculture, robots, the next 5 years? What does Jay think?
It's a really good question. I think that we're going to see robots take over tasks that there's probably not humans doing at high volume anyway. So I don't think, as an example, let's go back historically to the cotton gin. I don't think it was bad that we invented a machine to pick cotton. And that certainly didn't displace humanity. It didn't cause some global economic collapse or something like that. So I think what we're going to see is the applications of robots will become more precise, more focused, more intentional, more functional, if you would, more specific. And then I think that will free up humans to do things that only humans can do.
Yeah, I agree. I think specifically within the agriculture 4.0, right, we have uh, the laser weeder, which is pretty cool, but we're going to see, like the planter. We're going to see the harvester, and we're going to see not only data driven farming, which we already are experiencing, but, getting this into a system where instead of taking 100 people to plant, harvest, weed, collect, whatever it is, it's going to maybe come down to 10 to 5. And that's going to allow us to, scale rapidly, be more efficient with what we produce, and also keep costs down and, keep people farming, which is great.
Yeah, so I think these highly specialized, these very task specific robots will go out there. I think they will take over roles. I don't think they're going to have this wholesale displacement of humans in these particular industries. In fact, as much as acreage is diminishing, farming and farmers are diminishing as well. So I think it will make us more efficient. I think will help us maintain the food supply we need going forward. And I think it will continue to free people up to do. There's a lot of tasks, and I don't mean just when we say uniquely human tasks, things like creativity and issuing instructions and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that still requires human hands.
Yeah.
That's going to be really, really important as industry expands, AI expands, power generation and distribution expands, and everything in between.
Yeah, and I think next 5 years you're going to see, we call it cobots, right? Not just robots, but cobots, robots that are working, alongside humans, whether that's manufacturing and healthcare, or whether that's farming. It's not like a direct one-to-one replacement, but it's an augmentation, it's an enhancement. And so, if I can have 100 humans, planting, crops. Well, what if I had 10 robots and 10 humans, and I could do just as much, right? Like there's this trade-off, and I think that's going to be. I would expect to see that in the next 5 years. I really would.
Yeah, and I think part of that human role will be supervising the robots, the cobots, AI, and everything in between. Because what we're seeing right now is AI certainly acts like it is right, and it with a high degree of certainty, even when it hallucinates. And one of the things we've been discussing is there are fields where it's disruptive, maybe annoying to have an AI hallucination or some incorrect output. And then there's potentially fields that would be absolutely catastrophic. And imagine a pharmaceutical robot
Yeah.
that is one drawer off on pills, and there's no supervisory mechanism. And instead of giving somebody with diabetes their diabetic medicine, it gives them, we'll say, blood pressure medicine.
Yeah.
And it's going to say, hey, I'm right. I go to drawer A123 and I pull out the pills from A123 and I put it in a bottle and I give it to a person. And so I think humans in the loop as control mechanisms alongside those robots, or the cobot model, is going to be a necessary step.
One of the things we're going to probably dedicate an episode to, it's near and dear to our heart, is, former military, guys, is robots and, in the military, application of agentic robots, of agentic decisions on the battlefield. There's ethical considerations. And it's growing fast, right? Like there's drone swarms, there's, automation, there's growth, there's a huge defense tech industry that's out there. I know you're very familiar with this, with what you're doing with Red Thread X. I think we probably need to talk about this in an episode that's forthcoming, because as we're talking about, the application of robots in agriculture, because it's kind of lateral. There's not a lot of thought, it doesn't hit you in the head like, oh, robots, farming. But when I think of robots and human on the loop, my first thought is, military. And I think we probably need to talk about some more.
That's a great point. I think we're going to have a special guest coming in for that in the next week or two to talk about some of those considerations.
Drop the teaser. I like it.
Exactly. I love it.
Okay. Next 10 years, right? So I think before I turn it over to you, I think, the next 10 years, I think I would expect to see, us cross the Rubicon of a humanoid robot, right? I think we'll kind of figure it out. What the function of that is, I don't know, right? Is it vacuuming my house? Is it doing my dishes? Is it, replacing us on a one for one? Like, I'm not sure, but I think we will, because there's so much effort put into it. We're going to see the humanoid form becoming more and more prevalent and have greater dexterity and be able to interact in a lot more functions. I think we're going to see that next 10 years, right? And it might be that these become like a general purpose robot, literally like the Jetsons, right? Like Rosie from the Jetsons. Maybe that is what we see. The military application is going to be huge. Excited and terrified both, and what that's going to look like. And then you mentioned it, but in the next 10 years, right? Bio-inspired fusion of robots and biotechnology. We've talked about it both on the personal side, on the health side, on what the people are growing to. But I think that's going to become an area where there's going to be a lot of growth and a lot of potential. And I don't know what that looks like, but I'm pretty excited to see it.
I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see a backlash on the lack of regulation and governance for AI. I think it's one thing, and we're already starting to see it manifest with things like the state of Illinois prohibiting the use of AI as an online therapist for mental health purposes. There was a recent report in MIT Technology Review about therapists turning to AI and using that as an enabling tool during therapy, and it was not AI. It was a critical look at therapists doing that and some of the vulnerabilities that are induced there. There's some legal action against several large language model companies right now for some of the advice or considerations that AI, large language models, have given to individuals. So what I think we're going to see is a backlash, because it's one thing, and I'm not diminishing some of these negative consequences at all, the instructions it's giving and some of the loss of life that's resulted, not diminishing that, but it's one thing when it exists in the software side and it's a chat model and you're having this dialogue and it might be telling you things that are detrimental to your well-being or maybe leading you to a fatal outcome. I think as that ungoverned software space manifests in hardware, and it goes further and further reaching from, like you said, robotics to military to avionics. I think we're going to see a strong public interest in trying to rein this thing in, and I don't know if it'll be too late at that point in time.
I mean, that's the one thing that science fiction has continuously warned us about, right? You have a robot and it turns against you. Go back to 1935 Russian film Loss of Sensation. There's a robot that was meant for a good and it was used for bad. Um, there was the Stanley Kubrick film, right, where you have Hal, and Hal is turned against the people that he is programmed to serve for individual or to serve his own needs. I think you can go back. I think this is the common thread, the common fear within our psyche of yes, we've created this thing, but when does this thing turn against us? And how do you keep yourself in the loop to prevent that? And there is an actual, it changes the risk calculus when it's no longer just in my computer and I'm no longer interacting with it when I want to, but it has a physical presence, and that physical presence might have an advantage over what it can do to me, especially if there's involuntary action or something that is a misprogrammed action.
Right. So I think perfect way to wrap this one up. How do we prevent the open the door Hal moment as AI goes from data stores and AI computational centers and running on GPUs to embedded in machines that are literally touching our real world day to day?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm excited to see how it comes and what comes of it. And, on both sides, right? Excited for, the good and the bad, because, it's happening, and it's both scary and exciting.
So it's going to be yet another fun topic to continue to watch, explore, and see over time how it evolves, and then bring our updates back both to our reports and to our audience here with the podcast.
We're going to talk about this again for sure. So it's been great, Jay.
It has, Nate. Always great talking to you, and I hope you have a good evening.
Yeah, man. You too. Cheers.
All right, take care. Cheers.